Every food has a beginning, and for citrus, the story starts in this dense forest landscape. These are the Garo Hills, near the slopes of the Himalayas, where India's northeastern border bumps into those of China and Myanmar. This is one of the world's great biodiversity hotspots, home to hundreds of different kinds of birds and animals and thousands of plant species. And that rich biodiversity also includes food. A wild and endangered ancestor of all the oranges found around the world today grows here. To scientists, it's known as Citrus Indica. But to the Garo people, one of more than 200 different tribes in northeastern India, it's known as the fruit of ghosts. It's a food at the very center of their way of life, but the story of Citrus Indica matters to us all. Think of these forests as a living gene pool, one that contains everything the fruit has been in the past and everything it can be in the future. And in a world in which we've lost so much diversity from our food, that matters.
We're so used to watching nature documentaries about endangered big cats or rare birds or unusual types of sea life, but I've walked for 2 hours in search of this fruit, Citrus Indica, Memang Nerang, the fruit of ghosts. And this fruit, this tiny, small, cherry-sized citrus, this is an ancestor of so much of what we eat when it comes to oranges that grow in monocultures in Florida, in California, in different parts of Europe. But here deep in the Garo Hills, this is where it begins. This is the center of diversity for citrus, and Citrus Indica is one of the most important and endangered ancestors of that citrus. There are thought to be 1 billion citrus trees in cultivation today, found right across the planet from Spain to China, California to Cairo. We've created vast citrus plantations in every continent on Earth. From its wild beginnings in the mountain forests of South Asia, the world's orange trees produce more than 160 million tons of fruit, almost double the quantity of apples grown around the world. What's made the global reach of citrus possible and also created a huge amount of diversity is an extremely complicated sex life and an intriguing family tree. Behind all the world's commercial citrus being grown today are 3 main ancestors. There's the mandarin, scientific name Citrus reticulata. Next comes the citron, Citrus medica. And finally, the pomelo, which, as its scientific name, Citrus grandis, suggests, is the largest of the 3. These citrus ancestors were all happy to be fertilized by each other's pollen and so could exchange genes. This gave us the oranges, a hybrid of the mandarin and the pomelo. Lemons, a hybrid of sour oranges and citrons. Limes are a citron-mandarin cross. and one of the most recent, grapefruit, the result of a hybridization that took place roughly 300 years ago in the Caribbean, this time between a sweet orange and a pomelo. Generations of farmers noticing these subtle differences and selecting desirable traits is the history of fruit breeding. Long before humans started interacting with wild citrus, primates in the hills, including gibbons, were eating the fruit. It's likely that observing animal behavior sparked a curiosity in humans that began our love affair with citrus. And from a vast wild forest gene pool, humans began selecting fruits they preferred, planting them close to their villages, and so they became the world's earliest citrus farmers. However, the wilder, more ancient citrus can still be found, and just as their ancestors did before them, when the fruit is ripe, the Garo people venture into the deep forest.
And the ancient wild fruit, Memang Nerang, the fruit of ghosts, represents so many different things to the Garo people.
Citrus Indica is a fruit they use to cook with and make drinks. It's a medicine used to heal humans and animals. And it's a sacred plant. In some communities, when someone dies, the fruit is placed next to the corpse. This is part ceremony, as the presence of the fruit allows the spirit of the deceased to move into the afterlife. But it also has a practical role. Chemical compounds within the wild fruit help keep insects away. Citrus Indica's high levels of these compounds, powerful and health-giving phytochemicals, mean that eating it will be a shock to most of us. Memang Nerang is extremely sour and bitter.
But this fruit is becoming endangered. Over the last century, vast areas of the Garo Hills have been deforested, a process that continues to this day.
As well as deforestation, there's climate change. Erratic weather is impacting harvests, and loss of biodiversity elsewhere is also pushing more elephants and gibbons into the citrus forests, stripping trees bare.
Just think what that means. The very forests that gave the world one of the most delicious foods is disappearing. Without this biodiversity, humans would never have been able to spread citrus around the world, allowing it to shape other landscapes, inspire countless cuisines, and change our palates. Because as it spread far and wide, the fruit adapted and mutated again and again, creating new and extraordinary forms of diversity.
At 11,000 feet, the active volcano Mount Etna dominates the landscape of eastern Sicily. It even has its own microclimate, warm during the day, extremely cold at night. This fluctuation in temperature
triggers a chemical reaction within the oranges growing on the volcano's slopes. The result are fruits with high levels of chemical compounds called anthocyanins, which produce intense flavors and a distinctive red pigmentation. This gives this Sicilian fruit its name, aranci rossi, blood oranges. Oranges arrived in Sicily in the 9th century with Arab traders who were shipping citrus from India and China into southern Europe. And so the island's deep relationship with citrus has lasted for more than 1,000 years and 1,000 harvests. Many of the citrus varieties in Sicily with names such as the Moro and the Sanguinello are becoming as endangered as wild Citrus Indica in the forests of the Garo hills. It's part of a process of homogenization that's happening to so many foods around the world, a story captured in the history of citrus. To understand why, you need to follow the journey of citrus from India to Europe and onto the New World. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors transported citrus from the Mediterranean to the Americas. They planted them first in Florida, and then by the 18th century, they were being grown in California. The mission San Gabriel near Los Angeles was home to some of the first citrus trees on the West Coast. And you can find a living legacy of that early history at the University of California, Riverside, home to the largest collection of citrus diversity in the world. There are more than 1,000 varieties here, including the Valentine, a cross between a pomelo, a blood orange, and a mandarin. And there's also Citrus Indica, oranges that the Garo people of northeastern India would recognize.
This is Citrus Indica, and you can see it has a distinctive calyx.
Most of what's in this collection is now endangered and no longer grown commercially. The roots of the collection go back to the end of the 19th century. This was a period when botanists from the United States were being sent to Asia on missions to collect as many different crops as they could find. And from the huge diversity of citrus they brought back, just a handful were selected by the USDA and given to farmers to grow at scale. These selected varieties all share similar characteristics. They produce fruit that's large in size. They have tough skins, making them suitable for transportation. And perhaps the most important feature of all, they all taste sweet. By the time the orange juice industry took off in the 1950s, two main varieties dominated citrus growing, the Valencia and the Navel. What was also lost with the disappearance of diversity were much of those phenolic compounds, the sour, bitter tasting and health-giving phytochemicals. They are the plant's defense mechanism. And once these compounds are bred out of oranges to make them sweeter, the crop becomes more vulnerable to pests and diseases. Farmers then had to create a defense mechanism by spraying the plants with chemicals. But even the sprays weren't enough. There are no monocultures in nature, and as we lose diversity from the global food system, it's becoming fragile. The world needs more food diversity, not less, and the homogenization of citrus shows us why. A devastating bacterial infection carried by insects called citrus greening disease reached Florida in 2005 and then California in 2012. Other monocultures of Valencia and navel oranges also came under attack, leaving millions of trees struggling to produce fruit. It's the deadliest pathogen fruit growers have ever had to contend with.
The global crop is now so genetically uniform, there's little inbuilt resistance to the disease. Some crop scientists believe it could even bring an end to large-scale orange production within decades. But there is hope. Genetic traits have been found in the wild ancestors of citrus, including Citrus Indica, that can fend off the disease. With this ancient and endangered gene pool, it might be possible to breed diversity and resistance back into the crop.
We should see the people saving citrus diversity around the world as heroes, including the farmers near the slopes of Mount Etna growing rare blood oranges, and the scientists at the University of California, Riverside, who are keeping alive the collection of 1,000 varieties. And perhaps the greatest heroes of all, the people of the Garo Hills. They're the ones who've protected a wild fruit that could help save 1 billion fruit trees around the world. As the rest of the world starts to realize how precious Citrus Indica is, the Garo people are already working to save the wild fruit by planting seedlings in the forest.
To them, Memang Nerang, the fruit of ghosts, remains sacred, a source of food and a medicine. But it matters to all of us. Citrus Indica represents the past, present and future of a food we all depend on.